Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got a really interesting guest for you tonight, George Smitherman, who is a gentleman in politics that I've admired for decades, as he's run for numerous different offices, held different positions, been a real, influential individual within the Liberal Party and politics generally in Toronto, Greater Toronto Area, Ontario, and Canada. George Smitherman, welcome to the show, sir.
Very pleased to be with you, Brian. Good to see you after a long time.
It's been a while. So tell me, you posted a really interesting endorsement on social media that I want to get to in a couple of minutes about the Liberal leadership. But let's start off the top. Do you think the Liberals have a hope in heck in the next election?
Well, Brian, I'm a Leaf fan, so I'm always a believer. I do understand the state of our party and the predicament that it's in for sure, but I also understand the tight spot that our country's in, and for our party to be able to put forward a person like Mark Carney in this time frame, to me is a good beginning. But the election, those results, that's going to be up to the people of Canada.
The Liberal leadership is going to be fairly intense and very short. Does anyone that's never had a role in politics, other than potentially chairing an economic advisory group, have a chance?
In a certain sense, I'd say because of the Trump factor, the economic factor, the risk of tariffs, etc., does make this race unlike any that we've ever seen before. And like I said a second ago, I think that Carney sets up well for that circumstance. That's what I believe. That's why I believe that he does have a strong chance.
Now, one of the reasons why I was interested in chatting with you and was a little bit surprised when you came out with your endorsement, and I may not have my facts right, but my recollection is I think it was 2006, you did not support Michael Ignatieff and supported Bob Rae in the Liberal leadership and were quite critical of his international experience. Do you think that same just visiting tag is going to stick to Mark Carney?
Well, Mark Carney is somebody that's been of Canada. He's been, a deputy minister or associate deputy minister or something like that in the Department of Finance and served for the Bank of Canada, etc. So the greatest bits of his life have been spent in Canada, and I think he's going to have no difficulty reflecting that relevance in a leadership race. Ignatieff wasn't just limited by his international experience. He also didn't have, I feel like, that much of a touch. And this is going to be the opportunity that Carney has to demonstrate. And I think he's actually off to quite a good start. I don't know if Michael Ignatieff can skate, but I do know that Mark Carney can. Going to Edmonton to launch his campaign was an act of, I think, extraordinary foresight and also, a bit of political courage. And these things all are markedly different than what Michael Ignatieff was able to lay down. But 2006 was a hard fought campaign, and I was really in it for Bob to a significant degree.
Some people would also say that Carney is sort of a blue liberal on the right side of the Liberal Party in the center of the political spectrum. I always thought of you as sort of a more progressive, more left-wing liberal, supporting Bob Rae and some of the policies that you've been supporting. How does someone like you reconcile your politics with Mark Carney's politics?
I had a lot of people tell me I'm actually a red Tory, Brian. I'm definitely like to be associated with progress and social progress, but I was really proud to be in a government with Dalton McGuinty where we were pretty committed to trying to have balanced budgets. And I really, really have been critical of the Justin Trudeau, Kathleen Wynne shift of the Liberal Party to the left to the point that it became, in some cases, practically indistinguishable from the NDP. So I welcome a candidate that wants to bring the Liberal Party to a more centrist position. I think that's the winning position for politics, and I think it's the winning position for Canada. So I'm right aligned with that. I've got a couple of teenagers. I'm not interested as a baby boomer born in 1964 to be saddling them with extraordinary debts and deficits. So anyone that's on board for a more centrist looking appeal, I'm all over it.
I interviewed a professor of political science last week who said that the business liberals weren't in the Liberal Party anymore, and that the party really had moved to the left, and that one of the successes of the Liberal Party historically had been the big tent that welcomed Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien, John Turner, and Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and even going back to the 1960s, Bob Winters, and a lot of different people that had experience on Main Street and Bay Street in business, and that the current Liberal cabinet does not. Is that a diagnosis that you would have similarity with?
I came out in the Liberal Party in the final term of Pierre Trudeau. I'm an Etobicoke boy. Alistair Gillespie was my member of Parliament. Be another a less common, a less familiar name, but still very much in that more centrist or business tent. I think that that's safer ground for Liberals, and I hope that through this leadership race, we can have that openness, if you will, to people, including those that are making their way forward and helping to build economic growth. I think that's a sheer and pressing necessity for the Liberal Party and for Canada.
Your endorsement was long and extremely well written. What motivated you to do that and do it so quickly and early in the leadership campaign?
Well, there was one lady that posted a comment on my endorsement overnight and said that the grammar was terrible. And I do know when I make an uncommonly long post, there's always a chance on my smartphone. There's always a chance that the words will get away. Mark Carney has given me a sense of enthusiasm and drawn me back, if you will, to taking on a more organizationally proactive role in the Liberal Party, and that's why the endorsement was full-throated. I think in the context, and it's not that I don't admire admire, pardon me, in a certain sense, Pierre Poilievre's success coming from roots, within 10 kilometers of Parliament Hill and practically never leaving. He's done a lot with that. I just don't think he's set for the moment. And the moment is that we need somebody with the greatest degree of acumen around economic matters. And I think that Mark Carney is, in a certain sense, just so well aligned with the moment in history. And so I wanted people to know that follow me on Facebook, where I posted that I'm all in with respect to lending support to him.
There's a meme going around on social media that compares Mark Carney's resume to Pierre Poilievre's resume and experience. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's a page long for Mark Carney and 3 lines long for Pierre Poilievre. Is that fair?
Well, it's fair. The question is whether that cuts both ways, because there's definitely an appetite in our society for some populists to have disdain for people of accomplishment, and people that have participated in central banking and stuff might not be everybody's cup of tea. But what I really thought was smart about Carney and The Daily Show was that appearance took the issue of the 2008 financial crisis, got into the subprime mortgages issue, and actually should have brought home to people, and I think it did, that Mark Carney's decisions in 2008 helped to save the homes of thousands and thousands of Canadians. When you look at the profile of housing loss in the financial crisis in the United States versus here in Canada, Canada has a demonstrably better record, and Mark Carney's fingerprints are all over that. And I think that appearance on The Daily Show, actually, it was funny. It showed that he was quick-witted, and that's not an easy format to have participated in. But I thought what was really interesting is that format drew out some observations about macroeconomics and the way that they affect the household and pocketbook issues of Canadians.
We're chatting tonight with George Smitherman, who's got a long history in politics, about the Liberal leadership race and an endorsement that he came out with just last week. A very long and very passionate one for Mark Carney as the future Liberal leader and obviously Prime Minister of Canada. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with George Smitherman. I'm going to ask him a little bit about his history, the people that he's supported in the past, what his key policies are, and what he thinks about Trump, what he thinks about tariffs, what he thinks about the Liberal leadership, and what he thinks about the upcoming election. It's going to be an interesting conversation with George Smitherman tonight. Stay tuned. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We've got George Smitherman as my guest this evening, talking about the Liberal Leadership Convention debate, the campaign, what it means for Canada, who George is potentially supporting and came out with an endorsement of last week, and the implications on Canada, upcoming federal election, Trump tariffs, etc. And I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. George, let's take a step back. Let's remind everyone, if we could, about your background. I didn't realize that you got involved in the Liberal Party when Pierre Trudeau was Prime Minister. You must have been just a teenager.
I wandered into the Liberal nomination meeting at Silverthorne Collegiate in the final days of December of 1979 and turned 16 during the campaign that followed. Joe Cruden, who was the Liberal candidate, and the Cruden family. This is Peter DeNolo's father-in-law for people that are looking for a reference. Was the candidate against Michael Wilson, who was by then the incumbent MP. I cut my teeth in that campaign heckling Michael Wilson from the back of the halls in church basements and stuff, and would come home at night with my mother saying, I don't know if this is a good sign, but another riding association has called to see if you could come and heckle their candidate too. So I put my boisterous, loud voice to work to find myself that way. More importantly, Brian, the Liberal Party, particularly at that time, when I want to say women were really critical in running the committee rooms, was like a second home to me. And people like Marion Maloney, later a senator, Simone Flaff, B. Yakimoff, these are all names that were very, very central to making the Liberal Party for me, not, really basically like a home that over time really became an extended part of my family. So I owe a lot to the Crudens and to Etobicoke Center for the opportunities that it gave me to cut my teeth on politics. And once I saw politics and had an opportunity to be involved in it, that was it. I was hooked and preoccupied to a certain extent.
Now, people will remember you as a cabinet minister and as a mayoralty candidate. When did you first run?
I first ran in 1999 with Dalton McGuinty in the riding of Toronto Centre Rosedale, and that was an election where Mike Harris won a second majority, but as Liberals, we picked up 10 seats, and I was very lucky to be one of those. Served a term in opposition before coming into government with Dalton in 2003.
And you've had several different cabinet posts, is that correct?
I had two different cabinet posts representing kind of what are now, what might be now viewed as four different ministries. Back in the day, the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care were integrated as one. And after 5 years there, the longest, pretty much the longest stint of a Minister of Health, matched by my successor, once removed Deb Matthews, I went on to a newly formed super ministry, Energy and Infrastructure. And it was in that portfolio that I had a chance to help confront the 2008 financial crisis and be involved in a wide variety of initiatives that drove a lot of economic activity in Ontario at a very, very precarious time.
And then you ran for mayor?
Yes, I did, Brian. I uh, I was restless to run for mayor, especially provoked by David Miller's handling of the municipal workers' strike that turned our parks into garbage dumps. I was out and about with my volunteers cleaning up street corners and such, and it really turned me on to the motivations of being the mayor of Toronto. I had served as Barbara Hall's chief of staff in the 94 to 96 period at Toronto pre-amalgamation, and was always very, very attracted to the local advocacy aspects and the closeness of municipal government to the people.
And what have you been doing since?
Since 2010, I've been building family and doing a variety of business activities. I had the great privilege with my late husband Christopher to adopt two children who are now 14 and 16. So I'm in the throes of all of that. And in 2017, I remarried to a Cuban man named Rolando. I've been doing a variety of businesses, spent several years running the industry association for the regulated cannabis sector. I come from a family of entrepreneurs and small business roots, so I'm constantly seeing opportunities and putting my energy into those. At the moment, I'm focused on the healthcare sector. I've returned to that after a lengthy absence, and I'm working on health, human resources, and strategies to help more older persons live in the community as they age.
So I remember you as very active within the Bob Ray campaign during that 2006 leadership contest. Who else have you chosen to support running for leaders or prime ministers or premiers?
The thing about it is that I'm a party man in the sense that I had my first opportunities to work in David Peterson's government after having served as a field organizer for the Ontario Liberal Party. So frequently in leadership races, I've actually been kind of on the neutral side and working for the party and helping to organize things. So it's not every campaign that I throw myself in as a partisan, only in those that really specifically attract my energy. So the Bob Ray campaign was definitely that. I lost my job to Bob Ray in 1990 when he defeated Peterson. But I really did regard him as exemplary. Ray Days to me was a very sensible liberal styled approach to preserve public sector jobs during a time of unprecedented financial constraint, etc. So I was a huge fan of Bob's. And what's less known is that Bill Graham, who was my riding mate in Toronto Centre, at the time that he retired, the plan had always been that I would try to take his federal seat and go to Ottawa. But when that timing was set, I was deputy premier and very ensconced in Dalton's government. And Bill and I both said, hey, what about Bob? He just moved into the riding in his Uncle Saul's, I think, old place on McPherson. And as it turns out, when Bob Ray ran in Toronto Centre, he got more votes in this riding than Bill Graham or I were ever able to pull off. So supporting Carney is a little bit new in a certain sense because, like I said, I don't throw myself at the partisan level into every leadership campaign, but I think this one really matters.
So let's talk about the timing. You're obviously must be concerned about Donald Trump and his threatened tariffs, and what that means from an economic standpoint for Canada. The skills one would think you need in a prime minister and a leader are very different, sort of today and or frankly in March to June than they would have been a year ago. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think that the moment the moment is an economic moment. It's a threatening moment. Pardon me. And I think that elevating that on the issue list as it has sets up better for a Mark Carney, who some people are going to be inclined to criticize as a guy that can't give a barn burner of a speech or what have you. So the gifts that he has are super well aligned with the needs of the moment. And I think that this is the moment in history, and that's why that's why I'm lending whatever energy I can to see him become successful.
So I think about, the way that our politics were sort of last fall, and axe the tax, and a lot of the things that Pierre Poilievre was talking about probably were appropriate for the time, given concerns in the Canadian politics generally, and obviously Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister's popularity was dismal, and the Liberal Party looked like it would go down to a massive defeat. With Trump and the 25% threatened tariffs, I think you're right that sort of the situation changes fairly dramatically, and I think with Mark Carney, the attitude might change. Obviously, Chrystia Freeland as well, given that she disagreed in the end with some of the things that Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party and the Liberal cabinet were thinking about doing at the time. Does it appear that Pierre Poilievre has really changed his policies and his strategies? He's still, standing behind a podium that says "axe the tax." He's still talking about that. Do you think he's got to change his tune too? If you were advising Pierre Poilievre?
Well, I do think that it's still a pocketbook issue. Like, I think that as I said earlier about the Daily Show appearance, what I found interesting there was it was able to translate what I would describe as kind of like a macro economic issue and then talk about subprime mortgages and then contextualize that with respect to how that affected everyday Canadians that were at risk of losing their houses. And this is what a leader has to be able to do because Canadians are, of course, evaluating the risks of Trump through their own pocketbook and livelihoods. So it's not like Pierre Poilievre is entirely off base on these things, but he has trained the people in his party to say only four things, four slogans wrapped together is basically the litmus test for whether you can be one of his candidates or not. But I think his comments this week showed that he is coming around. He made a I think he, after some delay, has made strong statements with respect to the risk of Trump and all of that. So, he's a very crafty individual, and he's obviously built quite a political machine there. They're loaded with more money than is imaginable, frankly, for a lot of people practicing politics, etc. So nobody should despite the enthusiasm that I have for Mark Carney and the rightness of the times, it's not that all of that easily overcomes the challenges that had been mounting with respect to the perceptions of the current Liberal government in Canada. So the task of defeating Pierre Poilievre is still a very challenging one for sure.
You commented about how you were heckling people when you were just 16, 17 years old. You were always thought of as a retail politician, someone who really connected with people at the doorstep. Jon Stewart actually sort of spoke about this in the interview with Mark Carney, where he said, you're up against this populist, right-wing populist wave that's around the world. And he said, run away. Don't run for politics, run away. Do you think he's got a hope in heck? Like, shouldn't he just run away?
Well, time will tell. But like I told you before, I'm a Leaf fan, so hope springs eternal, and it's not a time for leaders to run away. Canada is facing really significant. Everyone likes to say this is the most important election in history, right? Like everyone running always tries to say that, but I think a lot of people would conclude that the risks at the moment are tremendously great. The volatility, just because of the nature of the leader of the United States, is what it is. And people that have got a grounding in the kind of significant matters that are going to be coming up would seem to be well suited to lead Canada. But he's trying to do it in front, if you will, of a Liberal Party, which is down on its luck to a greater extent. So who knows the outcome? But the thing about it is, it's all going to come quite quickly, isn't it?
It is. But come back to this retail politics and the experience and the ability to, shake hands, kiss babies, whatever it is that you got to do. I'm not sure. Versus, an unbelievably smart, experienced guy that's been governor of the Bank of Canada, governor of the Bank of England, et cetera, et cetera. Jon Stewart said, "Run away," because he sees this, and you've seen it, you've experienced it. This right wing, very partisan, very populist, almost anti-expert, anti-intellectual, movement around the world. And it certainly is one of the reasons why Poilievre has done well. The trucker convoy was there. Trump has done well. People in Italy, Hungary, across, Germany, France, etc., even the UK. Tell me how you combat that. If you sat down with Mark Carney tonight, what would you tell him he's got to do on the hustings?
Well, the thing is, like I definitely like my retail politicians, but the thing about retail politics is it's not what it was because there's so much cynicism out there, and people are not quite as polite as they once were. Door knocking and main streeting and street cornering and subway stopping, those are all things that I cut my teeth on with Bill Graham. I always look at Bill Graham as actually an extraordinarily gifted politician. He was a man of tremendous intellect and academic reputation. He was a man of considerable economic means, but he had a tremendous gift at the doorstep to relate his international experience to the circumstances back home of the Filipino community or whichever community he might be dealing with. Mark Carney's not going to have time for any of that. The race for leader is going to be brief, and we're going to be into an election before very long. But what I see forming is a counter coalition to the one that you spoke about, which definitely has global momentum. And it's a coalition of people that do see the risks at the moment of so great that they understand that Mark Carney's expertise is beneficial to Canada when Canada is in a time of great need. And that's where we're at. And I'm not saying it's scientific. I haven't seen the polling so far, but if I look at some of the commentary on Facebook comments in response to Carney, I could see an openness to him, including from people on the left who are not getting hung up on the idea that he might be more centrist or what have you, but come to understand that he's a man who's right for the times, that his experience is beneficial to Canada. So I'm optimistic, but I'm not oblivious to these trends that you spoke about with respect to, the ascendancy of the right wing. And with respect to anger and all of that, like I stopped campaigning in 2010. That's getting to be a while ago now, and obviously the world has changed. The world has changed a lot. So retail politics is not what it once was. Holding political events often means that you got to gate the door and make sure that the rebel rousers don't get in and the like. So times they are a changing.
Well, what numerous commentators said about the last federal election in the United States was that it was the podcast election. That Obama's election may have been the Facebook election, but this was the podcast, and that some of the podcasters that Trump went on with got 10 times the viewership that CNN and some of the other news programs got. So maybe that's the way you got to reach people today, is through the podcast. We got to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with George Smitherman talking about the Liberal leadership and how it has an impact on Canada and Canada's relationships with the incoming president of the United States, Donald Trump. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with George Smitherman. He's I didn't know this. I've been involved in politics since he was 16 years old in Etobicoke Centre, and then obviously very involved in municipal politics in Toronto, working for Barbara Hull, and in politics with David Peterson, and then running and serving as a cabinet minister with Dalton McGuinty, and then running for mayor. And maybe if we have a minute, we can talk about some of the municipal politics as well. But let's come back to sort of your experience and how leaders can turn things around. And I wanted to, for a second, focus on the Dalton McGuinty, Kathleen Wynne transition. I campaigned door to door during that time period where Dalton McGuinty departed, and I was actually campaigning door to door during a federal election, and the blank McGuinty signs or blank Dalton signs were everywhere. People were incredibly antagonistic toward Dalton McGuinty during the last, half year of his premiership. Comparable, I think, to some of the visceral negative comments about Trudeau. I'm not sure how low Dalton was in the polls, but he was not doing well. Kathleen Wynne ran in the leadership. It was a hard fought leadership campaign. And she ended up winning. She wasn't in first place to start with, but she ended up winning. And she ended up winning. I think it was a majority government. Tell me what your experience was at that time. What were the reasons why Dalton was so far low in the polls? How did the transition take place? And how did Kathleen Wynne take the Liberal Party from looking like a certain loss to a majority victory? And is there, more importantly, than history, I guess, a lesson there for today?
Well, I was going to start with what the lesson might be, because whatever criticisms I have of Kathleen, and I've got a few, she won an election that I don't think any other Liberal would have won. And she brought people to new voters not renewed the interest of liberal voters, but brought people to vote for the liberals that had not done so in several prior election cycles, more of those from the left than from anywhere else. I was on CP24 commentating that night, and they asked for the prediction before the polls closed. And of course, I was the liberal guy, so I said, I'm predicting a liberal majority. Well, lo and behold, she actually won that, and I give her full credit. That was on her. Dalton, I left in 2010, the earliest days of 2010, to pursue running for mayor. And I wasn't part and parcel of his front bench in the time up until 2013, when there was obviously some diminishing confidence in him. I think that the gas plants was a significant part and parcel of the challenge, and I definitely played a role unintentionally, in a sense, of creating the challenge around siting new gas plants. When I took the Lakeview generating station out of play and put that back into the hands of the people of Mississauga and give them restored access to their waterfront. Now, a great new thing is taking shape on the Mississauga waterfront, but in a certain sense, I created some of the pressure around finding the appropriate, if you will, sites for gas plants. Of course, that became a significant political issue, with opposition parties saying they would cancel the gas plants, and the Liberals sort of took the bait, notwithstanding the fact that by then that was going to be a very, very costly exercise. So, I was on the outside looking in. I was building a business, doing global trade promotion and activity. I wasn't an advisor to Dalton and all of that, but David Peterson and Dalton McGuinty, those are my leaders, and I hold them in high stead. And I think that through Dalton's time in leadership in the province of Ontario, he was a progressive person. But as a government, we were focused on balancing the books, and I think that that was an excellent balance for Liberals. The transition to Kathleen created a fissure within the Ontario Liberal Party, where there were McGuinty Liberals and there were Wynne Liberals. And as a former McGuinty Liberal, I wasn't that welcome in the Wynne Liberal circles. That's not a smart way to play a political party. And I think that that was demonstrative in the longer term demise of the Ontario Liberal Party that came in that subsequent election.
That's interesting. Um, in leadership conventions in the past, and they were very different, I presume, than today, when it's sort of done by votes rather than by conventions. But my assessment was that in 2006, Michael Ignatieff didn't make a lot of friends, and Stefan Dion and Kennedy obviously teamed up, so they made friendships with other candidates. Kathleen Wynne made friends with other candidates, and Sandra Pupatella, who was in first place on the first ballot, didn't appear to make a lot of friends. Is it important in leadership conventions to reach out to your competitors and make friends, or no, you just go for the golden wing and try to win yourself on the first ballot?
Well, in these preferential voting models, it really is important to be cultivating second and third ballot support. It's been interesting in a sense over the last 10 days or so to see the diminishing number of people participating in this federal leadership race, which perhaps creates more of a first ballot scenario. I don't properly know. But what I do know, here on the grounds of Toronto Centre, where I'm going to be working for Mark Carney against Chrystia Freeland, keeping in mind that I nominated her in this riding to run. I had hoped to, was told I wouldn't be, but got the chance to nominate her. She has lots of friends, and amongst many a good reputation. So I'm looking to keep friends on the longer term. So the campaign by necessity here in Toronto Centre is going to be one of relative respect amongst the candidates. And I think that the fact that Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland have a long-standing personal relationship, etc., is also going to guide that. So I'm supporting Mark Carney because I think he's right for the times, but I have lots of respect and admiration for Chrystia Freeland. If she had shown the backbone and taken the stands the stand against Justin to a certain extent that she did on December the 16th, 2 years before. This was her party and that was her moment. But I think this is Mark Carney's moment, and that's why I'm supporting him.
Do you think she should have taken a stand against some of the more progressive left-wing spending policies of the Justin Trudeau government earlier than she did?
Well, if she believes it as firmly as she stated that she did in her letter, there was earlier evidence that that might have been the right stand to take.
I guess history repeats itself because that's the criticism of some of the cabinet ministers in the Kathleen Wynne government as well.
Yeah, could definitely be, but we got to focus now on what's in front of us, and we'll have time for that kind of navel gazing later.
So tell me, Mark Carney is godfather to one of Chrystia Freeland's kids. Um, so they've obviously got a friendship. You've been in politics where friends are on different sides of campaigns. Rarely is it right at the leadership position, but how do you deal with that in party politics where people that used to be friends, teammates, all of a sudden are on different teams?
Well, I deal with it mostly by staying out of the leadership contests because they're not because they could be so challenging. Well, the thing about it is that these things can become cultural. Definitely, the Martin Chrétien era produced a lot of long-term, lifelong animus, and I've seen people that have hate-ons for others from their times running for positions in the youth wing of the Liberal Party, etc. So there is always a possibility that a partisan activity internally can create lifelong enemies also. And I've seen people that get lost in the inter-party politics and cut their teeth and expertise around that, and then actually are flatulent when it comes to contesting partisan ridings against other political parties, like people that are just in it for the buzz of crushing others within your party and not in it for the buzz of actually working against other political parties. That's the circumstance in Toronto Centre with the Provincial Liberal Association. A longtime Liberal political organizer, Hack, was the riding president for 8 years and stopped having meetings. Whereas I had built, and Glenn Murray, I think, continued with, quite an incredible and dynamic political machine that was engaged in the local community. Their interest, or that leadership group's interest, was just in positioning itself to be successful at helping to elect leaders within the same political party, etc. So some people do get lost in it.
That's interesting. Um, Tell me about the challenge about really campaigning against the party. When you think about Kamala Harris, the biggest criticism of her was that she couldn't find one issue that she disagreed with during the Biden presidency. Here, the Trudeau government is obviously out of favor. Both Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney are going to have to come out with some criticism, but they're running for leading of the same party. And so, how do you do that? How do you balance criticizing your predecessor at the same time as wanting to take over the party that he is the leader of today?
Well, this constraint for Harris was obviously all the greater because she was still in the administration. Carney is more liberated, but on the other hand, in the short nature of the race, caucus support's super important. So I think that this is a difficult balance, but in one way, it's made a little bit easier by the fact that the carbon pricing approaches have become quite unpopular. So it's a bit easier to throw those under the bus in favor of other alternatives on the go forward. Now, if anybody asks me for a piece of advice about another policy that the Liberals should easily take a different position on, it's the approach to pharmacare, where the Liberals and NDP were aligned on the idea that they should wrap their arms around a national pharmacare program, even though there's no money to actually do it. So they use the word pharmacare, choose only two indications out of many, And I think that's a wrong-headed approach where an idealistic view that we can build a pharmacare program and fund it at 15 or 20 billion dollars a year. I think that that's obviously not on the cards in the current fiscal environment. And a policy where we take the available resources, which so far is $300 million a year, and gap fill for those Canadians that do not have any access to get that prescription that a doctor or nurse practitioner might give them filled. To me, that's a sensible liberal approach. And that's an example of a policy that, if anybody asks me, is there a different approach that Carney, as the liberal leader and prime minister, could propose? It would be to retool our approach to pharmacare and quit pretending with people that Canada has the financial resources in the shorter term to actually fulfill the promise of the word pharmacare.
I want to come back to tariffs in a second. Housing is another issue, though. What would your policy be on housing?
Well, my policy on housing would be to force the governments that are lending all of the costs to new housing to strip their costs out. Poilievre's got a reasonable suggestion or two that people should take a look at. And Stephen Del Duca in Vaughan, I think recently, the mayor of Vaughan, recently made some changes. The fact of the matter is that the biggest constraint to getting housing built is not the availability of land, it's the extent to which all of the government's costs are piled into it, so as to make it distinctly unaffordable for people and forcing people to look to travel further and further and further and further from their jobs to find housing. So the governments are a significant part of the culprit in the challenge of building housing in this country because they're all in there they're all into it for their own dough.
31% of housing is taxes. That money comes out first. Developers make their money, after everything is built, and the time delay and the regulatory regulation hassle is also a big issue. We're going to take a break, a final break, and come back with some concluding comments with George Smitherman about the Liberal leadership and its impact on Canada. I want to turn in this final segment to talking about tariffs and what he thinks the strategy should be for both the Liberal candidates as well as the Government of Canada and all the premiers in Canada in regards to combating the threat of 25% tariffs from newly inaugurated President Trump. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. George Smitherman, a long-term, very active politician in Toronto and Ontario and Canada, is my guest tonight. And he's come out supporting Mark Carney in the Liberal leadership. George, with your experience, I got to ask you, what do you think we've got to be doing, both from a political standpoint, but also political in regards to the Liberal Party and the Government of Canada, but also and the candidates for the Liberal Party, but also across the country, the different premiers in regards to combating Trump? Should we have this sort of Team Canada approach? Can different people have different ideas? What do you think about what Ford's doing? Tell me what your assessment of our current situation is.
Well, I think that, Pierre Trudeau during the Meech Lake Accord said that the risk was that the prime minister was going to become the head waiter to the provinces. And the Danielle Smith role in all of this can't be overlooked. And really, actually, the challenge of being the head of the national government in Canada shouldn't be overlooked either. That job has become increasingly difficult as provinces have taken on really kind of regional points of view. It's not easy to have them all aligned. I was a bit bristly at all the positive comments Ford was getting for his Captain Canada thing because he was bouncing around a little irrationally at points. First, we were going to cut off electricity, and then a week or two later, we were going to actually supply them with more electricity, etc. I really think that the approach has to be kind of an eye for an eye. So if tomorrow is tariff day in the United States, then Canada has to respond with tariffs which are politically and economically punishing to other areas. And I think that there should be more of an implication here also on the longer term economy of Canada to use this as an opportunity for consumers to reprofile their spending towards Canadian products. So, Smucker's jam is very popular in my house, the raspberry version especially, and a fair bit of that frozen pizza world, and I got two teenagers, comes out of Ohio, and Smucker's jams comes out of the States. And so I think that we also in Canada have an opportunity, if the tariffs do emerge, to take a hard look at our consumer spending, which on a dollar basis is stronger towards buying American products than they from us. They're just a much bigger market. So I think that actually, in a sense, some economic good can come from forcing Canadians to reprofile their own purchasing power away from American suppliers, and for our governments to make those points. And Doug Ford, like, why didn't all the province, why he's the chair of the Council of the Federation? I don't think he was having that many Council of the Federation meetings because he was doing all these MSNBC and CNN and other Fox News interviews into the United States. I really think they're getting onto something also with things like the focus on rare minerals, and not just oil and gas, but a variety of the other natural resources verticals where Canada is very integral to the United States supply chain. So I don't think that we should be shy or back down. You have to face up, square up with a bully, and show them that you'll put hands up if that's what's necessary to fight for the long-term interests of Canada. But I think that economically, there's also a message for Canadians, which is look harder at the way that you're spending your money and spend more on Canadian or non-American products. And I think that there's a lot of personal pride that can be brought up amongst Canadians to make campaigns like that successful. During the entirety of the Trump administration, I stopped drinking California wines. Now I know everyone's going to tell me California didn't vote for Trump, but the thing about it is that I didn't travel there any more than I had to, so I used the power that I have, which is my discretionary expenditures, to focus those on places that are more reliable and friendly.
So buy Canada.
Yes.
Retool pharmacare such that it's not universal, but targeted at
That
the
it's
people
not
that are in need.
pretending to be universal. The part I don't like about pharmacare is that it's pretending to be pharmacare when it's just for two indications. So if we have any dollars available for pharmacare, get those to the people that are not at the moment able to access and fill their prescriptions. I have benefits. Yes, they're provided by the private sector, by a private plan, but we don't need to take those out. We need to build on that patchwork that's there and fill the gaps for Canadians that struggle with access.
Get rid of, reduce, or eliminate development fees and or other taxes on housing to make it more affordable to build. Jettison the carbon tax, and eye for an eye in regards to tariff threats from Trump. That's the agenda from George Smitherman.
Well, I'll take all of those and be happy to talk about healthcare some other time.
We'll do that. George Smitherman, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
It's always great to see you. Thank you so much.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online even from Toronto Center at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos go up on my website, briancrombie.com, as soon as the radio show goes to air, and I post them on social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Threads, and YouTube, and all those different podcast servers. Check me out. Thanks, George. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.